I'm like, all right, what is next? Hey guys, how are you? Excellent, excellent, excellent. Just got a couple other people joining us, so I'm going to admit them, and then we will kickstart and get started. All right, so this is the All Agent Business Mastermind as a follow-up to the Capper Mastermind yesterday that I think some of you were in and some of you were not. So what we covered yesterday in the Capper Mastermind was really focused entirely on where are we finding new listings? What are we doing to make sure that we are uncovering as many listings as we possibly can to fill our pipelines with inventory, knowing that that's kind of the key to business growth. And so we can kind of focus there today if you so choose, or with a small room like this, it's always kind of fun as well. We can be as specific to your needs on things that you'd like to mastermind around, get your colleagues' opinions on, or ask as you choose. So where do you want to start? Anybody have something specific that they wanted to be certain that they used this room and this opportunity to address, or shall we dive into listings first and foremost? Your choice, because it's your time.
I could ask some questions that I'm having, may be helpful to other people. I don't know.
Certainly, go ahead, Ronnie.
Okay. One for instance, property disclosures. Have one where, you know, half of the checks on the side aren't really there. Half of some of the pages aren't signed by the owner. And then reach out to the listing agent. You get some of these listing agents to like mention something even about like, you know, they could pay the $300 or the $500, just kind of not like, hey, this is what I need. And it's like, you know, how we do business and how other people sometimes do business is different. So I'm just curious with the property disclosures, you know, how some other people would handle that, or, you know, obviously he said he would go back to the, I said, you know, we need to go back to the owners. Part of the problem too is that these people don't necessarily live there most of the time. Sounds like they may have a caretaker, but, you know, in my eyes, I'm thinking, well, then, you know, then ask the caretaker who the pump company, the septic pump company is, or, you know, when it was last pumped. So I'm just curious how, you know.
Well, so first and foremost, in the state of Connecticut, the not living there is not a valid exclusion for not filling them, right? So it doesn't matter if you've lived there or never lived there; you still have an obligation to fill them out. The only real exception to that is if you're dead. If you're dead, the executor doesn't have an obligation to fill it out on your behalf of your estate. So unless the owners are dead, they got to fill them out. And if they're not filled, what I would do is I wouldn't wage war with the listing agent. You needed the relationship with the listing agent to get you through to the closing. I would send the incomplete documents and the buyers to their attorney to say, hey, these are incomplete. Could you please send some kind of message over to the seller's attorney to get these completed, or we're going to look for the $500 credit. And then the sellers can determine whether or not they pay the $500 credit at closing or complete the document. Don't get on your white horse to do that, right? Because
I guess again, what the problem, I totally agree with you. What's happening a little bit in this case is that they don't, you know, they don't even want to kind of, it's almost like they're not even making the offer, not based on all of this, because that's what I'm trying to explain, that this is really like, you know, if there's a radon issue, you're going to get that in inspection. And if it's safety, you know, it usually falls on the seller. It's more the buyers that are a little bit like, you know, thinking they need to check off, you know, not me, but check off all these boxes of, oh, I need this information, you know, prior.
Yeah, so I'll tell you that for me, I always advise buyers to read what was on there, sign that you've received it, which is all they're doing. They're not signing that they agree to anything. They're just signing that they received it.
Right.
Get it, sign it, and then forget about it. Hire your own people and then move forward. Because it's a lovely attempt at getting people valid information, except in my
I agree.
opinion, you can't hang your hat on it. So I would just tell them, look, in this scenario, this looks to me like you'll be getting a $500 credit at closing, because it's not a required document for sellers to provide to you. They kind of half filled it out. Your attorney may choose to attempt to get better information on the tail end, and advise you whether or not this half filled out document entitles you to the $500 credit. But certainly don't wait around waiting for more information to make your offer. How much could it possibly change the offer? Right? Because you make your offer, especially nowadays. Just make your offer. It has to be strong, and it has to be now anyway. Just do it, and then deal with it on the back end with inspections.
Right. I think the other issue, and just in general, like I was in New Jersey, before, like some people have never even heard of septic, and all they hear is like, oh, if the septic is not, if the septic, which obviously, if you need a new septic, oh, it's going to be a big cost. So it's partially too, some people not even realizing, they think, oh, was it maintained? And it's like, maintaining is having somebody just come in and check it and, have it pumped every few years, to, a certain degree. So I think that's, a little part of it as well.
Right. Just remember, there's no seller that doesn't maintain something that writes down on any piece of paper, hey, I haven't maintained this for the whole 9 years I've lived here. Right.
Exactly.
So the two things are they don't impact one another.
Okay.
And you're always going to have your own professionals come in and assess what is actually there, regardless of any pieces of paper. And I would use that example.
Okay. Sounds good.
No seller is going to write in, yeah, this is a failed septic system. Good luck. Please make me an offer. No one's going to write that.
Right.
They'll check unknown. And so,
exactly.
Are you holding out for more unknown boxes to be checked? What's the point of that?
I agree.
Yeah, Rick, I was going to add to that oftentimes, because you have that column that says unknown, you might get a completed disclosure, but everything checked off is checked as unknown. So it doesn't give you any better information anyway. You just have to have your inspectors, including your septic inspector, because you just, that's really the only people you can trust on the condition is the people you hire to come in and inspect. Because Rick's right, nobody's going to say my septic system is failing, or I haven't had that maintained in 9 years. They'll say they don't know.
Exactly.
As a buyer myself on the investment property side, I sign them that I've received them. I don't even look at them anymore. It's because they're just, to me, it's 5 pages of especially when landlords are selling investment properties, because again, they normally don't even live there. So it's all just unknown. How old is the roof? I can look and see how old the roof is. I can tell whether it's newish in the middle of its life or it's crap, right? I can see that. So I don't need someone to write down a date for me. And again, buyers who don't buy all the time have their inspectors to assess and come back. So tell them the only information that they're going to get comes post offer, right? Without making an offer and having it accepted, everything else is kind of irrelevant, because you're not going to get the information up front.
Right.
From
and
certain
like I
folks
said,
anyway.
anything safety, whether it's radon, anything safety is going to fall in 99% of times on the seller. So, if they're worried about.
I would be really cautious about saying those words out loud.
Right. No, because it doesn't always. I know, but what I'm saying is, if it's a safety issue, it'll come up when they do the inspection.
Yeah, if it's a safety issue, it'll come up, but be cautious that you're not setting up the buyers for an expectation that doesn't show up. Yes. Right. And that's one of those things that we have to, just generally speaking, we have to prep our buyers and our sellers differently than many of us do. Right. From the buyer side, we need to make sure that buyers understand that inspections are done as a means for you to learn how to use this house. You're not doing inspections to discover all of the bad things that no one told you about. Like that's not why we do inspections. And inspections are not done to initiate a whole nother round of negotiations, especially in today's market. Right? They're done for your purposes. Sometimes on the tail end, we can have some things addressed. But remember, in the state of Connecticut, this is an as-is state. Health, safety, foundational, any of that stuff, none of it, radon, none of it is required for the seller to mitigate. Zero is what the obligation is. And I would be really clear with my buyers that that is the legal obligation of the sellers to address things at inspections. Because if the seller takes that stand and you've made a different set a different expectation, well, now you have conflict, and that's how transactions fall apart, right? The buyers are upset at somebody because they thought they were going to be able to have stuff fixed. And in order to move things along, we sometimes nod our heads and say, yeah, no worries, no worries. I wouldn't, just don't get caught in that trap. Be objective, be very clear with buyers about.
And here's another situation of what you say, and that's why I like your opinions always. You know, these buyers, these sellers are kind of clear. They have an underground oil tank in their minds. They've been using it and it works and it's fine. When you speak with a lot of people, like I say, I never say anything. If I take a poll and ask all these agents, you know, I would say a big majority would say, oh no, that's the, you know, seller's responsibility. They have to take it out, blah, blah, blah. And as you just said, if they're saying that and they're not, you know, and if it's safe and doesn't show contamination, even if it, that's my other question. If it shows contamination, then are they legally, do they have to remove it?
Nope.
No, they don't. Oh, that's good to know too. Okay. Okay. So that's like another scenario. Like you say, most people would say, oh yeah, the seller's going to do it, but the seller's already saying this. I'm not going to be saying that I'm not going to say what anyone's going to do.
Yeah, let's be clear. As is means as is. And if that's if that's a leaking underground oil tank, now might the health department kind of come in and start to exert pressure on a current owner to address things? Might there be additional conversations between a municipality and a homeowner because it could be contaminating groundwater and hurting the neighbors. So those things might happen, and I've also seen them not happen at all. Right. And so be certain that there's the expectation of a buyer and a seller, which is in an as-is state, the seller has no legal obligation to do anything. And so the buyers need to understand that. And the sellers, for our part as listing agents, my personal opinion is I would set the stage with every single seller that I had, that they should negotiate their transactions and accept offers, knowing in their head that they need to set at least $3,000 aside for anything that might come up at inspections that might jeopardize the best buyers, which is who they chose, right? It's not that they're legally obligated. However, it could put into jeopardy the transaction between you and the best buyers, because you just chose the best buyers. In your mind, those are the best buyers. Why would you want to have that disintegrate, go with the second best buyers or the third best buyers, only to have that same issue come up again? So I used to tell my sellers right up front, negotiate your transaction, say yes to numbers and terms, knowing that you usually have about a $3,000 issue over here, plus or minus, but a $3,000 concession. If nothing happens, great, extra $3,000 in your pocket. If it's a little over, well, then guess what? You're only upset for $900 because I already told you it was going to be at least $3,000, and it ended up being $3,900, right? But it sets different expectations for people instead of the way most of us communicate with our clients, in that I represent the seller, so therefore I'm going to make sure that they know that they're in control. I would encourage you not to beat your chest quite as much about how much control they're in, and start setting different expectations for them that they may have to give. Then guess what? When they don't, you look like the hero, because you were able to work the transaction such that the buyers understood that this was you're accepting it, and period, end of story. We don't want to hear back. And you get to look like the hero when you've set the expectation that it's going to cost $3,000. Just a thought, but it always worked for me. I set very different expectations with my clients on either side around inspections. And I will tell you that one of the things when I was still in the field, very, very rarely did I have a transaction fall apart due to inspection issues. And I believe it was because I took the stand that we don't, once someone says yes, we don't lose transactions due to inspections, because there's always a way to figure it out. Someone's just got to pay for something, figure it out. Do you like the house? Then you got to pay for it. Do you want to sell the house? Well, then you have to pay for it. Do you like it and do you want to sell it? Well, then split the cost, right? There's always a way to get it paid for. Because here's what I have to tell you, in 22 and a half years of real estate, I have never seen the answer come to the table of, well, we just can't figure out what's going to happen with this inspection item, so I guess we have to burn the house down and start from scratch. Like, I've never seen that be the resolution. So knowing that that's not the right path, well, someone's going to buy it and someone's going to sell it. It might as well be these two people. Let's just figure it out. Set different expectations and you will not have those things come up quite as much. Questions, comments, concerns about that? Dana.
I have a question, since you brought up about leaky underground oil tanks. Because we had a situation in my own house when we did a renovation and we decided to take out the oil tank, and it turned out it was leaking, and testing showed that it was contaminating soil. So we were actually quite pleased, because that meant our insurance kicked in, so we didn't have to pay for what would have been about a $50,000 expenditure. But what Ronnie was just saying made me think of this. What if the seller, okay, they have the underground, they won't take it out, and then it turns out the oil, you test it and you find out it's leaking, but before you close, but the seller won't take it out. What happens with the buyer's insurance? Because wouldn't that be like pre-existing and they wouldn't cover it if it went into the, contaminated, and it wouldn't cover the cost of it? That would only be covered if the seller would, bite the bullet and take it out?
So I can't speak to how an insurance company may or may not view that. What I can speak to is the idea of discovery of contamination prior to close. Most attorneys would then advise you to walk away from the transaction if the seller is unwilling to mitigate, because you don't know if it's just an oil tank with a couple of tablespoons of dirty sand and then you fill it in, or has that been leaking for 20 years and is it contaminated 15 feet down and 50 feet wide, and oh, by the way, there's a stream in the backyard and it's contaminating that water, which is now contaminating half the neighborhood. It could turn into $100,000 or more issue. So if it were me in that position, I would say, okay, thank you, we're not your buyer. I think we'll go find another house. The other thing is, once that's discovered, if the buyer were obtaining financing, once that's discovered, if it gets back through either via appraisal or via conversation to the lender, the financing would not move forward with that in place either. And so the seller at some point is hard pressed not to take some action, simply because there's so few buyers who then are actually available and on the table to purchase that particular property. So I'm not sure if I answered your question, but those are my thoughts on that.
Yeah, you did.
Donna.
Sorry, I walked away for a minute. So I just want to get back to what you were talking about the expectation setting with the inspection items. My goal every day is to wake up and learn something new. And I got to tell you, Rick, that was amazing. I never heard it put quite that way. And my goodness, how many issues would that resolve just by having that pre-conversation? And like you said, it's a win-win, because if they don't have to spend the money, then they don't have to spend the money. That's great. But yet it starts them thinking, it gets away from that adversarial and, oh, we're not doing anything, just to have that pre-expectations. Brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And what's really awesome about it is that here's the reason we don't do it, right? We don't do it because to many of us, those words sound as if we're not on the side of our own client, right? And so we're on, there's clearly sides to be chosen here. And if I'm telling the buyer that we live in an as-is state and the seller has zero obligation. We will see what we can do should something come up, but the seller has zero obligation to correct any issues. And on the seller side, that they should set aside money. It sounds to many people like somehow you're taking the other side, right? And have people in my career said to me, it sounds like you're taking the other side? Sure, of course. You just have to be prepared for that conversation. And so when they say that, you say, oh my goodness, I am so sorry you misheard, right? This is actually me advocating for you at a really high level. Because instead of putting the whole transaction with the best buyers that you will choose in jeopardy, I want you to be clear about what my experience says is likely to happen. This is me helping you troubleshoot issues before they even come to the table, right? And so it's opposite of what many people think you're doing. Again, you just have to be prepared to defend why you're doing it. It's about, remember, when we talk about this all the time, anyone can put a property on the market or sign a buyer and sell them a house or sell a house. It's the skill of getting people from an accepted offer to the closing table that we get paid for. That's where the skill and talent comes in, right? It has nothing to do with pushing a button on the MLS, right? That doesn't take skill. However, at least what I used to promote in terms of why you should hire me, I used to say things to both buyers and sellers, like, you know what, the whole marketing and exposure and putting your house on the putting a house on the market, and what does the sign look like? Like, if those are all the things that you're looking for, here's what I can tell you. It's the biggest secret in real estate. We all do the same stuff. We all do the same stuff, right? Some of it is wrapped in a pretty blue wrapper, and some of it's wrapped in a pretty yellow wrapper, and some of it's wrapped in a pretty red wrapper. But real estate, the industry in and of itself, we all do the same stuff for you. What you're hiring me for is because I have an expertise in making sure that after you accept an offer, you actually get to a closing table, because that's where the skill comes into play, and that's what I have an expertise in. All the rest of it, you can really, if all you're worried about is accepting an offer, anybody will do. You might as well hire the cheapest person, because I'm not the cheapest. Never have been, never will be. However, if that's all that you're worried about, any woman will do. If you're worried about getting to a closing table, that's where you should sit and have a second thought about hiring me.
Right. The cost that it could take them to take that house back to market and lose that buyer that was otherwise fine could be more than the $3,000.
100%. And
the days on market, so people are like, why isn't it selling? I mean, it's so detrimental. It's perfect.
Yeah. And to Donna's point, is almost always more than the $3,000. Either the offer is less, or the terms turn into the seller expending more to carry the house longer, right? Or it's the exact same offer and the second inspection yields the exact same thing. So the issue hasn't gone away, right? So, any hoodle. What else?
I have a question in relation to what you're saying. So you're saying Connecticut is an as-is state.
Mm-hmm.
One, if you could clarify a little, and two, so when people put on a listing, as is, does that really, what do you think?
It's redundant.
Most people, yeah, that's what
it's redundant.
Think.
Well, so here's what's fascinating, right? So I tell you guys all the time that Connecticut is an as-is state. Not everybody hears that, right? And so I didn't know it when I was new in real estate. I worked for 5 or 8 years before I actually uncovered the fact that was right. I behaved as if with my clients. So it's not necessarily taught in principles and practices, and yet it is fact. As is means as is. And do agents sometimes say as is because they're unaware that as is already implied? Sure. And sometimes it's listed in a listing to make the point, right? Sometimes they may well know that we live in an as-is state, and they're underlining it and circling it, saying, look, don't expect, we're going to say yes to your number. You can do whatever you want, but as long as we get to the closing table at that same number, all is fine. Expect nothing in return, right? So it's just it's redundant, or it's done for to highlight it. What else?
So I have a question. Sorry, let me start the video. So for me, as is, listing means that no inspection contingency will be accepted. I mean, you do the inspection for your own purpose. However, whatever results out of it, it really doesn't matter to the seller. If as is not mentioned, then, it's worth going for an inspection contingency, and it could have some weight. So I'm confused.
Well, it certainly could. It certainly could. I mean, your buyers have a right to do an inspection and make it contingent. Your buyers have a right to get an inspection report and go back and ask for certain things to be done prior to the closing, either via a credit or having the work done. The point I'm looking to make here today is, in the state that we live and work in, the seller has no legal obligation to say yes to anything that a buyer asks for, right? That's the as-is version of this. But buyers always have a right. Again, in today's market, I'm not sure how smart it is to wave your inspection flag, because you end up losing more houses than not. And also remember, the idea of waiving your inspection contingency is not the same as waiving your inspection. When I buy for myself on the investment side, I waive the inspection contingency all the time. It's just an automatic. I always do an inspection, however. I've just already looked at the house myself to know, and I know enough about what I'm buying that I know where the issues are going to be. I'll either not move forward based on my own eyes, or recognize that, the inspector's probably going to come back and tell me that that's old and that needs repair. But I already saw that, and I already built that into whatever, right? So the idea of waiving your inspection contingency is different than waiving your right to do an inspection. You can still do an inspection and not have it be contingent. Just like you can obtain a mortgage and not have that be a contingency, right? You can say I'm obtaining financing, however, me getting the approval is not a contingency in the contract. I'm still obtaining financing, it's just not contingent. Does that make sense to everybody? Right? They're two different things. You can do stuff as long as you're telling everyone that's what you're doing, and not have them be out in the contract. You're buying it regardless. You're buying it whether you get the mortgage or you don't get the mortgage, which means you better have cash as backup. Or you're buying it regardless of what the inspector comes back and says. Right? You don't have that as an out in the contract to say, yeah, I didn't like the way that came back, I'm out.
Rick, I think you hear me?
Yes.
I think it's helpful when I do I drive this home on all my consultations, but to also let them know in this market, you're my client, I'm protecting you. I don't want you spending $1,500 on an inspection, expecting to get anything out of it. Like, I'm protecting you. Like, sure, do it. Things will come up. Maybe we can get there, but you really drive that home that I'm protecting you from wasting money thinking that they're gonna do anything.
Yeah, I love that, Jessica. Right. And do you hear how different that is than, yeah, do your inspection, and then we'll sit and we'll figure out all the things that we're going to go back and ask the seller for. Right. And there's still a lot of agents who have those conversations with their buyers. It's a different expectation that you have to have them understand. You have to set something slightly different. And I love the fact that we're doing these things on your behalf, and just flat out saying it. We could be saving you money. If your expectation is that this house is going to come back with lots of issues, perhaps this is not the house to pursue, right? Let's bank that money and pursue something where you believe that you'll come out differently. Excellent.
However, I would like to add to this. I managed to, on a multifamily in BlackRock, right before COVID, we closed right before COVID. we managed, following the inspection, to get $6,000 of the sale price. So, I mean, I guess you want to pull all the strings for your clients. I know the market has changed meanwhile, but yeah, I think we should always encourage an inspection, even for either purpose, for any purpose. I mean, it's good to know what to buy.
Yeah, so let me be clear. I am not here saying that you shouldn't, that you should waive your inspections, and I'm not here saying that when stuff comes back at your inspections, that you shouldn't take a stab at asking the sellers for whatever. The last property I bought, I got a $4,000 credit based on inspections. I do it myself. My point is, as buyer's agents, just set the right expectations. Make sure your buyers understand that we'll fight for as much as you choose. However, you should expect zero. And so if they come back and say, we'll give you $10, that's better than zero. So we're on the plus, right? If it ends up being 4,000 or 6,000 or 600, those are all what I'm attempting to remove is the idea of entitlement, both from the buyer's agents that then gets communicated to buyers, because that entitlement is what allows transactions to stalemate and fall apart, because each side feels entitled to receive something or not give something, depending on which side. I'm saying, what if you remove that entitlement by being clear with both sides about what this is and what this is not, what they can expect, and then if they get something, great, but their expectation is set slightly differently. All righty. So 28 minutes left. I'd love to spend a little time on talking through where you're getting your listings, because I'm not sure if anybody is as clear about this as I am, but that should be the number one thing that you're focused on when you get up out of bed and decide to go to work every day, right? So are you asking yourself the question when you get up out of bed every day, what will I list today? If not, you should write that down and start asking yourself that question. What will I list today? What will I list today? You've got to start convincing yourself, first and foremost, that finding listings is your job. Each and every single day, you got to find more listings. And so what are we doing right now? What are you doing that's working? How are you doubling down on finding listings? Or let's brainstorm things that maybe you're not doing that maybe you could or should be doing. Thoughts?
I'm going back years to, I started today. I've done this in the past, but really going to focus on all my A buyers, go through the expireds of years ago, figure out who's left, send it to them, any interest, and then find them and just put it together.
Yeah, I love that, Jessica, because that is like, that's two birds with one stone, right? You've got these buyers who are struggling to find inventory. There's all this unsold inventory from weeks, months, and years past that may well work for them. Those people were sellers once. Why not be sellers again? At a moment in history where you can probably make more than when you were on the market the last time, right? Without all of the hullabaloo of putting it on the market, because I already have your buyers here, right? It's brilliant on so many different levels, because let's remember this: when you sign a new buyer, remember that you are not stating to that buyer that you will get up and look at the MLS every day for them. You are stating to that buyer that you will find them a property that is suitable for them, kind of under every single rock. And if all you're doing is waiting for something to come on the market on the MLS, you're kind of only doing half the job on the buyer's agent side. Your fiduciary responsibilities say that you need to be doing more. You need to be calling for sale by owners to see if the property matches your buyer's criteria. You need to be doing what Jessica just said, finding off-market opportunities by going through the expireds. And what's cool about that is oftentimes you end up on the list side, so it becomes a twofer, right? Even if you get negotiated down, it becomes a 1.5-er, right? If it's not a full twofer. Very smart. I love that idea. Everyone should write that sucker down. What else, Anna?
How do you deal with a situation where you have a buyer interested in a property that's sold by owner? However, the owner specifically don't want to talk to agents, don't respond to agents. They hang up once they know you're an agent. They really don't care about talking to any person that's an agent.
Well, so the first question I would ask is, why are they behaving that way? Why is it that they don't want to talk to an agent?
They are being harassed by agents, probably.
Well, perhaps. And so I think my approach would be, instead of calling, I would show up at their front door to say, hey, here's who I am. We had a brief conversation on the phone the other day. I wanted to just face to face say to you, the reason I'm here is I'm not interested in listing your property. I'm interested in having my clients meet with you to perhaps purchase your property. That's a whole different conversation, right? Because a for sale by owner who is uninterested in buyers that are connected to an agent is, with all due respect, a moron, right? Because everybody's connected to an agent on the buy side. Are they really only waiting for the people who aren't connected to an agent? They're going to be waiting a very long time, right? So I would shortcut the phone, because you can get hung up on. I would just show up at the front door and have a simple conversation to say, I'm curious, how can we make arrangements for my signed buyer clients to view your property? Because based on everything I can see about your property, it's a great house for them. They're buyers, they're ready, willing, and able, and they're struggling with inventory. I'm curious, how can we get them into your property? Now, that doesn't mean the seller has to agree to pay you, but that's what you have a buyer agreement for, right? Then the buyer just pays you on the tail end. Right. So if what you're doing is having conversations around the for sale by owner coming up with cash to pay agents, to pay you as an agent, well, that's a slightly different story, right? Because now it's no wonder that they're not interested, because they've already raised their hand and said, I'm not interested in paying anybody. Though most for sale by owners will pay somebody on the buy side. Most, not all, but most. And in those circumstances where they're not, you just go back to the buyer. Hey, you know what? I found you an awesome opportunity. Please note, there is no compensation for me. So based on our agreement, you'll owe me at the closing table, and here's what that looks like. We can work that out one of a couple of different ways. We can build it into the offer price, and we'll work that with the seller, and so you're kind of financing my fee as well. Or you can just write a check to my brokerage when we close. Here's how that works. I'm curious, knowing that information, are you still interested in pursuing that particular house? And they say yes or no. For those of you who have never had a buyer pay you at the closing table, I can tell you I've done it a whole lot of times, and I've coached a whole lot of you to have that come back to you at closing on the buy side. It's not like this. It's not fantasy land. It's 100% real, and it happens more times than you think. Right? So just know that that's always an opportunity. The buyers get to make that decision. We're going to go, Anna, I know you had your hand up. Robert, do you have a question specific to this?
Yeah, but I think I just
so Robert, go ahead, and then I'll bounce back up to Anna.
I thank you. Yeah, no, my question was like, now if the client says no, can they go by themselves to try to purchase that property? Like in that example that you just made, like, you know, and they go like, no, but then you find out that they went behind your back. By the contract that they signed, they still have to pay us, right?
So let's be clear about how that works. By the contract they signed, if they choose to move forward and cut you out, and they buy a house or contract to purchase a house within the time period of your validly executed buyer agreement, we can enforce our buyer agreement against them. And what that means is they get a demand letter from me, they get a second demand letter from me. If they ignore all of that, we have a demand letter sent by an attorney. Very rarely is the commission high enough for us to actually hire an attorney to pursue it, because by the time we would get to some sort of a judgment or settlement, there's just not, nobody makes any money except the attorneys, right? So we do everything that we can to pursue that. I can tell you that in the last 3 or 4 months, I've had 5 positive outcomes with things like that. It's the longest win streak I've had in terms of pursuing buyers. So I say that now, but if you happen to be the next one, I can't make that promise to you, right? But I have done 5 in a row where the commission was either just paid. I had 2 that just wrote checks. They got my letter and wrote checks. I almost fell off the chair that I'm sitting in. And I've had 3 more that we settled for something in between that ultimately is better for everybody to just settle it and be done, even though it's not exactly what the commission would have been had you sold the house. That being said, Robert, it's not automatic, and I've had far more of those fall by the wayside simply because for an $8,000 commission, we'd spend that in the first month by hiring an attorney, and there's no attorney out there who for a max $8,000 is going to spend the time necessary on a contingency basis, even for 50% of it, because they'll burn through the $4,000 they would make. So nobody says yes to that. So it puts us in a tough spot. But we do attempt it. We do try. Anna.
Equity analysis, really great way to get more listings and exposure. So today I did 5. And Debbie Orr shows us how to do shortcut. So you're not going through a whole CMA that I was thinking before. So I reached for 1 hour, 5 people.
I love that. So equity analyses, right? The equity analysis is what Anna just put on the table. So for people who don't know what that is, describe what that is, Anna.
So it's basically you prepare short compare market analysis, and you show the current price that where you position property on the market, and you just show like median price to the client and let them choose and explain them why it will be benefits for them, know exactly how much and where they stand in the market. And it brings other conversations as well.
Well, and I think the last thing that you just said is the most important part of what of the whole exercise, right? Because the equity analysis itself doesn't necessarily uncover a seller every single time you do it. As a matter of fact, it doesn't uncover a seller more oftentimes than it does uncover a seller. And the simple version of an equity analysis is you're going to go through your database and pick 5 people and run the numbers on their house, and then call them and say, hey, I just ran the numbers on your house. I was thinking about you and wanted to just reach out and see if you wanted me to send this to you so we could set up a time to just kind of go through it. The market's going crazy gangbusters right now, and I just wanted you to be up to speed on what your property may be worth. Right? It's a simple conversation. They're just proactive market analyses for people in your database. The other thing I would do is, if it were me, I would call expireds and offer the same kind of thing. Hey, you know what? I see you just came off the market. I'm curious if we should spend a little time. I have an equity analysis on your property. I'm not sure exactly what went sideways in the last couple of months and why you weren't able to sell. I'm curious. I have some time later today at 4 or 5:30. I could pop by with this equity analysis and we could sit and have a conversation. I think they're valid for expireds as well.
Rick, yesterday I did cold call, and I called to a specific condominium in Stamford, and I spoke to one guy and it was like very quick, like, okay, no, I'm not interested, and he hung up. Then I got a voicemail. Same guy called me. He said, oh, I remember you. You are mom of that girl, little girl. I remember her. Can you call me, please? I'm not planning to sell, but I'm planning to buy. So I called him and I said, would be helpful for you if I will prepare an equity analysis. So he said, of course, yes.
Brilliant. Yeah. And again, like Anna said before,
you can use everywhere.
It uncovers other conversations. You know what? I'm not looking to be thank you for this. This is awesome to know. I'm not looking to be a seller right now. However, my niece is looking to move out of my sister's house and needs an agent to go and buy a condo, right? It creates an opportunity for someone to equate you with real estate and start a conversation. So even though you're doing this to uncover listings, which, oh, by the way, it does every once in a while as well. Because you have people who say, are you kidding me? My house is worth how much? I knew the market was hot, but wow, you know what? This changes everything. I may have to kind of rethink this. And we've had people go through that process to say, you know what? It's not going to be higher. So let's do it now. I'll figure it out on the tail end. I'll rent. I'm going to go take a trip to Europe for 6 months and wait out the market. Then I'll come back and buy something. Like all things that people feel are inconvenient. Be careful that you're not judging what will be convenient or inconvenient for your potential sellers. Because that's what I hear a lot. Well, what on earth do I say when they say, where am I going to go? What my script for that is, that's a great question. We've been actually having lots of really high level consultations with potential seller clients around that. Let's add that to the list of things we discuss when I'm there later today, or when I see you in my office later today. Don't just give them the answers on the phone. You use those to close for appointments, right? And now you're face to face in an appointment and you get to consult them through that. Well, I'm curious, for the extra $100,000 that you may earn from the sale of your home kind of right now, what might you be willing to do? Would you be willing to rent for a year? Did you ever have an idea of like living? I've always had this fantasy. I've lived in Manhattan a couple of times in my life, and now now I'm old and I'm a country bumpkin, and I think, oh my God, would I ever really live in the city anymore? And I think in a scenario like that, if my kids were out of my house and I could sell today and pocket an extra $100,000, I would do something like crazy. I would go back and live in the city for a year, just to kind of do that because it's been in the back of my head. Or go like live in Prague for a year, or go in, I don't know. This is not for me, but for somebody, like buy an RV and kind of tool around the country. That's a little too camping for me. But the idea of, right, we could glamp it up a little bit, right? We could take the RV to the Four Seasons, and then take no, I'm kidding. But the idea of something that could work for them from a consultation perspective. You just get to ask them questions. Has there ever been a time where you wanted to do something kind of nutty? What does that look like? How can we make that happen for you now? Because here's what's cool. I've had these conversations in the last 12 to 18 months with people. Mostly I've had them with some of you so that you could have them with your clients, right? Just modeling what that conversation looks like. And here's what's fascinating. When you start to ask questions, you uncover some of these like dreams that these people had that nobody ever asked them about. Like, oh, it's always been my dream to like backpack across Europe. I never did it when I was a kid. I went right into college and I got married and I had kids. I never did the backpacking thing. Like, well, let me ask this. Is that something that you think you might want to do now? And if you don't want to backpack across Europe, maybe you want to rent a car and just drive across Europe. How long would you spend? So I'm curious, knowing that your home may be worth $100,000 or so more today than any other time in history, before or coming, does it make sense to sell your house today, take some of that money to fund that dream, take the year to let the market kind of settle down, and then come back and buy something or rent something when you come back? Like people are looking to buy themselves time so that they don't have to sell now and then also buy now, right? You see how that works? So renting becomes an option, taking a trip becomes an option, RVs become an option. I've had some people say, you know what, I could just live with family for 6 months and I'll see what happens in 6 months. If it means an extra $125,000 in my pocket, why not? And they've made arrangements there. I know somebody who did that and took some of the extra money. This is a really cool story. Took some of the extra money and helped their parents. They moved back in with their parents, children and all. They earned an extra $125,000, and they took $25,000 of that extra $125,000, and they helped their parents remodel their house. which the parents needed to do in order to eventually sell it someday anyway, was struggling financially to do that. And they were going to live there for the year. So they like did the kitchen and the baths over in such a way that they could get away with $25,000 for a spruce up. Everyone was happy. They're all living happily ever after. Now, we'll see what happens by the time we get to 11 and a half months and see if everyone's still happy, right? But here's my point. Until you start to ask the questions and allow people to close their eyes and think about what the options are, you just don't know. And the worst thing we can do is make those judgments for people. Well, they'll never want to rent. Why would I even suggest that? That's not been my experience. Okay, somebody else had a hand up. Who was it? Ronnie.
Sorry, going back, we were talking more about, I think you were talking about, homes being for sale by owners and the customer paying the buyer's commission. Semi-related. I was curious because I don't know if it's, someone had said in New York you can see it, in Connecticut you can't, but if you have a home and they're offering the buyer's commission, let's say it's 2%, or most of them are 3 or 2.5, and there's one that's 1.5 or 2. Is there any way to see if the seller is actually paying 5% and they're just divvying it up 3% and 2%, or no?
No, I mean, you could certainly ask the listing agent. I don't know of a listing agent who would answer that question, because it's really not it's none of your business, right?
Right. Someone said in New York it's not. Someone said in New York you can see for some reason.
It could be the one key MLS. It may have the. I'd have to look. I'm not sure, but it may be.
Yeah.
In some MLSs.
That's why I was wondering.
In some MLSs, both sides are listed. In Connecticut, in the Smart MLS, it is not.
Okay.
Right?
Correct. And then I'll just tell you, like I said, when you ask different people, you get different things. So I'm just saying, somebody had said that some people would put like a contingency on the offer as far as the percentage that the kind of like that the customer wanted you to get your fair share. I mean, and does that make sense?
So let's I'll create an example. You've got buyers that you represent. The property that comes on the market that looks real good for them is being offered out at 2%, and you're not interested in earning 2%, right? Your document says you get 3. For me, generally speaking, I always accepted 2.25 and above. If it was below 2.25, then I would have a conversation with the buyers, right? And the conversation with the buyers is the same as what we went through before. It's, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, this awesome house came on. Please note, I call it cheap seller syndrome, right? You may have heard me say that before. I think sometimes you guys hear me say these things and think that I'm making it up on the spot. I'm not. That was part of my script when I was in the field, to say to the buyers, this particular listing suffers from cheap seller syndrome. And what that means is either the sellers or the listing agency is unwilling to pay the fee that is the minimum fee I will accept to represent you on the buy. So we can do one of a couple of things. You can either make up the difference at the closing, right? It's 2%. I'm looking for 2.5, or I'm looking for 3. So you'll bring the extra 1% to the closing. Again, you get to make decisions about what the numbers are. Or with your permission, I can write into the offer that I'll be paid at a certain level. And so you can do it either way, knowing that if it's a multiple offer situation and the offer they put in has the seller increasing what they're paying out to me, that it puts them at a disadvantage. And so that's the conversation I would have with the buyers, to say, we could do it this way. However, in a multiple offer situation, it really works against you. So I don't advise it. If you're interested in pursuing this house, let's not do that. You and I figure out what you'll owe at the closing table, and let's just pursue that vigorously. And then you'll just cover the differential over here, or else it puts your offer at a disadvantage. In a non-multiple offer situation, it may not necessarily put them at a disadvantage. However, it may have the seller decide not to move forward with their offer, even if there's nothing else on the table, right? So I don't love that approach. And here's the really important piece of information about that approach. You may not do that without having a conversation with your buyers.
Of course.
You can't, well, you say, of course, because you understand that, right? But I can tell you that I've had listing agents come to me and say, you're not going to believe this, right? They accepted an offer only to find out the next day that the buyer's agent never, longer story than we need to go into. But if you as the buyer's agent are just writing things in or asking for more without the buyer's knowledge and permission to do so, you are breaching your fiduciary responsibilities, right? That is an absolute no-no. So you can put it in an offer as long as the buyer has said, yes, we understand why that would be done. We understand the pros and the cons. We want you to get paid more. We don't really want to have to pay you at the closing table. So put that in there. If they're okay with that, then you can move forward. But until that conversation is had, you don't get to have any conversation with anyone else except the buyer about your compensation. Because let's remember, regardless of how you think this all works, your agreement is with the buyer, and the buyer has an obligation to pay you your fee. Most of the time, they are relieved of that obligation because we get paid through the MLS. But they have an obligation to cover our fee. And if you think otherwise, you have not read our documents, right? Buyers have a responsibility to pay the fee. Usually they are relieved of that obligation because we get paid through the MLS based on what's offered out brokerage to brokerage. However, what I just said will also explain that sometimes brokerage to brokerage only covers a portion of our fee, and buyers need to then make up the difference. That's not a brokerage decision. You get to make those decisions with your clients, right? I'm not here to tell you that you must ask for at least X%. You own your own businesses. I am here to just support those businesses. And so you get to make all of those decisions. However, I just want you to be clear about how the documentation actually works. Because I think there's sometimes a misunderstanding around that, and it leads to conversations with buyers that sound like this. Well, who pays the commission? Oh, don't worry, the seller pays the commission. I'm going to tell you what, I would rather resign my license than say that out loud to a buyer.
In that situation, the other person, what the person was saying too, is that, and again, that's what I'm curious, that sometimes what happens is when they had put that in there, then the seller's like confused because like, wait, I thought I'm paying, 5 or 6%. And what I'm wondering is, when you're, and again, I don't know how our agents, work it, when you're going for a listing and you're getting the seller, to agree, let's say, to a certain percent, is it the person who's doing the listing that decides how the percentage gets split up, or is it the buyer and the seller? Is it the listing agent and the seller that decide?
Yeah, so great question. It is not the listing agent's sole decision about how to divvy up the commission. The seller has a right to be involved in that conversation. Some sellers really aren't interested in they kind of, as long as you're not doing something that puts me in harm's way or that is a detriment to me in some way, right? So if you took a 6% listing and decided to keep 5% and offer 1% out, I think it's pretty clear that would be a detriment to the seller, right? For me, I was always a 6% guy and I offered out 2.5. It was not a 50-50 even split. I kept the 3.5 and offered out 2.5. And I had a conversation with every one of my sellers. Sellers have to sign the data input sheets. And one of the fields they have to fill in is how much of the commission you're offering out. So sellers need to see that and sign off on it. My conversation with the sellers was always, the expectation of most buyers agents is 2.5%. However, there are times where utilizing my fee for service is 6%. And here's all the things you get for that. I offer it out at 2.5% and keep the extra percent because sometimes we need to bring money to the table to get things done or closed. And so my promise to my sellers was, yes, am I keeping the extra 1%? You got it. Part of the reason I do that is because I'm worth it. The other part of the reason is because there are times in a negotiation where everyone's at a stalemate that if I have some extra funds that I know are coming, I can help get things taken care of. I can help fix something at a closing. I don't offer that right up front, right? But that's the idea behind it. I have cushion where I can look magnanimous and come to the rescue and get things taken care of, right? Again, the idea of we couldn't bring this transaction together over $5,000. I just don't understand that. And I don't say I don't understand it from a buyer and seller perspective. I don't understand it I don't understand how real estate agents allow that to happen. I don't get it. I don't get it. There are always ways forward. You got to improve your skill and know how much you're worth so that you know you're getting paid what you're worth, so that there's extra funds on the tail end to be able to close some of that gap if you need to. Robert. Oh, and so here's where we are. We're at 2:01. So we are out of time. I will gladly stay on for Robert and Anna's questions, and then we will officially end. If you need to depart, I understand, and it was great to have you here. I will go through Robert's question and Anna's question since they had their hands raised before 2 o'clock. Go ahead, Robert.
Thanks, Rick. My question, I guess, would be to go back to, if they ask you who's paying us, the agent, technically, what's the answer to that? Is it the buyer or the seller? Who's technically paying us then? What's the answer to that?
Who's asking you that?
My client. Like, if you're like the buyer.
Your buyer client or your seller client?
My buyer client, let's say.
Okay.
If he says, the sit down, he's like, all right, so who pays you technically? Where does the money come from?
Yeah, so great question. And what I would do is I would bring them right back to our exclusive right to represent buyer document. It's the top of the second page. It's paragraph 7, A, B, C, D, and E, right? 7A says that you, the buyer, are obligated to pay the fee. 7B outlines how much that is. And 7C says, hey, for the most part, we get paid all these different ways. And if we don't get paid all these different ways, then we will look to you. And so the answer I would give is, technically, as a buyer client of mine, you are obligated to cover our fee. However, 99.5% of the time, unless you're shopping off market, that doesn't happen because we get paid through the MLS. So the MLS ultimately, broker to broker, covers our fee. However, the buyers are obligated. And I think it's really bad real estate to hide the fact from them because we're afraid that they might not like that answer, right? So to be clear with them, yes, when you and I sign an agreement, you're obligated to pay the fee. And most of the time, like 99% of the time, that doesn't happen simply because when you're purchasing on market, on the MLS, our fee is covered broker to broker through the MLS. That's how I would explain it. Anna.
Rick, so when you was talking about the commission that you charge 6%, I'm just curious, did you use that, package that I have a golden, silver, and platinum or whatever, 5%, 5.5, and 6? Because I don't like personally, but I'm just curious if you use that.
Yeah, so what you're asking is kind of menu of services, right, on the listing side. I did not. And so what Anna's asking is, there are some agents who have like tiers of service, and the lower tier is X%, and then the middle tier is something higher, and the top tier is something higher. I didn't have those tiers. I built a value proposition that I decided was worth 6%. I asked for 6% each and every time. And to be clear, let me state this. I asked for 6% almost each and every time. There were certain circumstances where I knew the players involved, or I knew the situation involved, and I would, or I knew my own situation, right? There was a time where Debbie and I were fighting for a listing, and We actually watched the seller go back and forth between our office and the Prudential office across the street. So she met with us, said, thank you very much. We couldn't close her at that moment in time. And she said, I'm going across the street to meet with one of your competitors. Did our objection handlers, tried to close her. We couldn't close her. We watched her go down the stairs, across the street, up the stairs, met with somebody across the street. And then we watched her leave there, come back across the street, come back upstairs. And we sat down with her again. And she said, so here's the deal. I like you better. And she's willing to do it for 4.5%. And so if you'll do it for 4.5%, you'll get the listing. And so we did our objection handling and said, well, you know, is it BDG, blah, blah, blah. We did all of our script work, and we attempted to move from 6 to 5.5, and maybe we could do 5. And so she finally said to us, look, it's very simple for me. I told you, I like you better than I liked her. However, it's a money thing for me. I will go with someone I don't like as much for less money. So if you're willing to do it for 4.5, I'll sign your listing paperwork right now. And Debbie and I looked at each other. We knew that we had very little inventory. Like, we were in this mode of, we were short on inventory. It was February. We were kicking off a new year. We really needed listings. We're like, okay, here we go. 4.5 it is, sold. Right? So I'm not saying it was 6% or bust. Anyone who tells you it's 6% or bust is lying to you, because that's not real life. Were there circumstances where we would work for less? Yes. However, we built a value proposition that we felt was worth 6%. We built a script and a presentation around that value proposition that we thought was worth 6%. We utilized a listing consultation that I teach in Ignite. So for those of you who want to hear what that is, it will not be this week. It'll probably start middle of next week, the seller portion of our program. So I'm going to start with buyers in Ignite this time, starting tomorrow. So next week will be sellers. Join us for Ignite. I'll be happy to go through that with you. And what I found was about 50 or so percent of the time, maybe 50, 60% of the time, based on the consultation they received and the value proposition that we put forth, we didn't have commission conversations. No one asked about it. No one asked for less. They just signed the contract at a higher commission rate. And then there was the other portion of the time, the other 40 to 50% of the time, where there was some conversation. And what I found was probably only 10 to 15% of the time in total was there aggressive conversations. People were like looking for a deal. Most of the time, that in between 30% or so, whatever that number is, it was people who felt like they had to ask. And so sometimes if they asked if we could do it for less, one of my best scripts for objection handling on commission was, you know what, this all sounds great. We like you a lot. I'm curious, will you do it for less? No, I'm sorry, we're not able to do it for less. So I'm curious. Other than that, are there any other questions that you have for us before we sign the listing paperwork and get started getting your home sold? Right? We would just close again. And people asked once, we said no, and they happily moved on. Then there were people who asked and we said no, and they said, well, how come? And we had to do some more objection handling. Here's the thing though, when you start at 6, we oftentimes ended up at 5 3/4 or 5.5, right? Or even 5 1/4. And so when you're still above 5, we were still profiting and building that cushion more so than just a 5%er. When you start at 5, there's only one place to go from 5, and that's into the 4s, right? When you start at 6, you can end up oftentimes in the 5s. And just in case you think that I'm talking about a time frame that has long gone by, you have colleagues, because I haven't been in the field in over 15 years, and so I am talking about a different period of history. However, the concepts are the same. And many of your colleagues do exactly what I'm talking about today and still take 6% listings. Remember, I sign all the listing agreements. I see the numbers. So all of those things still work today. Are we pushed more? Is there more competition? Are commissions under pressure? Sure. Is there still a way to take minimally 5, 5.5, 6% listings? You betcha. You have to work on what the value proposition is. You have to work on how you're presenting that value proposition. And the main thing you have to work on, and I'll leave you with this. the main thing you have to work on is being the only person they call. 65 to 70% of sellers in the United States only call one real estate agent. So if you constantly feel like you are fighting for listings because you're one of 2 or 3 people that they've called in, you're in the 30% that have to fight for it. You have to continue to work to be in that 70% category of they only called me. And so now it's just you and them. There's no outside other pressures to be cognizant of or to be fighting against. How do you move from the 30% to the 70%? It has everything to do with building a bigger database and communicating with a database at a really frequent, consistent, loyal level. It's a 36 touch. You need to be in contact with more people more of the time, so more people think of you when they think of real estate. And when that happens, you're the one they just call. And you don't end up in the 30% bucket fighting with 5 or 6 other real estate agents or even one other real estate agent to win the listing. I'm going to tell you what, if there were like a couple of moments in my real estate career that were real light bulb moments for me. What I just said to you was one of them. Because when I went and actually implemented that, everything changed. Everything changed. My listing presentations, I was calm, I was confident. I talked to the people about what they wanted to, consulted them through what they were looking to achieve. I had no angst about what I was worth and asking for what I was worth and holding firm on what I was worth that much of the time. It all just changed because I was the one that they were talking to. It wasn't like there were 6 other people outside the front door waiting to take my seat. Because I got in front of more people who just called me. Changed it all. So if that's helpful, keep working on that, grow that database, and then keep growing the database because grow the database, make sure that you're putting those systems in place like a 36 touch program so that you can be in constant communication with those people and then grow the database. So you're in touch with more and more and more and more and more and more and more people.
Yeah.
Right. All right, guys, it is 2:12.
Thank you.
I'm going to end that for you here. I know there was some things in the chat. I think Rachel asked for some more information on the equity analysis. I'm not 100% sure where to tell you to go on that, Rachel, except that I'm pretty sure that has been discussed a lot of different times on the James Shaw Pivot Shift Ahead call, most of which are recorded. I'll ask. I think Donna.
Debbie was doing them. I think that's where it started. Debbie, or in the morning on the business builders.
On business builders. Okay.
Yeah, she was the one who. I think that's where whoever was on got it from because I wasn't on today, but I know she was doing that yesterday or the day before.
Okay. Yeah. So check out some of the recordings. Check out some of the recordings inside of our own YouTube channel. Plug in to Debbie's Business Builders at 9:30 and ask the question. I'm sure she'll be happy to go through that. And I'll see if Donna knows when some of the James Shaw stuff happened, so I can point you to specific recordings.
Rick, can I edit?
Of course.
If you sign up for Pivot Call on Facebook, then you can just put in a search bar equity analysis and it will pop up exactly the video when we were talking about that.
Oh, excellent. Excellent. There you go. So, and this is being recorded. So if you need to kind of circle back and hear all that again, this will be posted by tomorrow. So lots of different ways to grab that information. Guys, I hope this was helpful. It's a pleasure to spend time with you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Rick.
Have a great one. We'll see you soon.
Thank you. Take care.
I'll see some of you tonight at 4 o'clock for Ignite. We're working on expireds tonight. So if you want to know more expireds, join us at 4.
Thank you.
Thank you.